Many people wake up each day feeling tired, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. It's a weariness that no amount of sleep can truly fix. It lingers like a shadow, following you from morning until night, creeping into every task, every relationship, every moment of silence. And yet, when you look at your life, you might not see anything outwardly wrong. You're working hard, being responsible, trying to do the right thing. So why this persistent heaviness? Why does your soul feel so tired? The answer is often found in a quiet truth we don't always want to admit. You're trying to do everything on your own. You're carrying the weight of your life on your shoulders, holding on to your plans, your fears, your pain, your expectations, without truly surrendering them to God. You may believe in God, you may even pray, but deep inside, you're still clinging to control. You're still the one trying to make everything work. And that constant need to manage, fix, and hold everything together will eventually wear you down. This kind of self-reliance is subtle. It doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like responsibility or strength. Sometimes it even feels like faithfulness. But there's a difference between doing your part and trying to play God. When you rely only on your own strength, you are limiting yourself to what you can understand, what you can plan, and what you can carry. And no matter how strong or smart you are, that is never enough to carry the weight of life alone. We were never designed to live this way. From the very beginning, we were created for relationship with God, to walk with Him, trust Him, and lean on Him. But somewhere along the way, especially in times of struggle, we forget. We begin to believe that everything depends on us, that we must keep it all together, keep pushing, keep going, because if we stop, everything might fall apart. This mindset is not just exhausting, it's also untrue. God never asked us to be everything for everyone. He never asked us to have it all figured out. What He asks is simple: come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Rest in this context isn't just physical. It's a deep spiritual rest, a peace that only comes when you stop striving and start surrendering. It's the relief of knowing you don't have to carry the full weight of your future. It's the freedom of knowing that your value isn't based on how well you perform or how strong you appear. But you can't receive this rest if your hands are still full of everything you're trying to control. You can't feel God's peace if your heart is crowded with anxiety, perfectionism, and fear. Letting go is hard, especially when you've been in survival mode for so long. It feels risky, it feels uncertain, but surrendering to God doesn't mean you give up. It means you give over. You give your plans, your worries, your outcomes to the one who sees the whole picture. You allow God to step in where your strength ends. And in doing so, you make room for grace. Grace that renews your strength. Grace that lightens your load. Grace that gently reminds you that you are not alone. So if you're feeling tired today, if your soul feels worn and stretched thin, it may not be because you're doing too little. It may be because you're trying to do too much without God. The moment you realize this is not a moment of failure, it's a moment of invitation. It's an opportunity to release what was never yours to carry and to rest in the hands of the one who truly holds it all. Strength is often misunderstood in today's world. From a young age, we're taught to be strong, to stand tall, to never let them see you cry. We're told to be independent, to have a plan, to push through pain, to hustle harder. And in many ways, these qualities serve us well. They build resilience, discipline, and perseverance. But somewhere along the way, we begin to believe that strength means never letting go, that being in control, always having the answer, always staying composed, is what makes us truly powerful. But real strength, divine strength, looks very different. It isn't rooted in control. It's rooted in trust. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout or force or prove. It's the strength that comes when a person chooses surrender, not because they're weak, but because they're wise enough to know they were never meant to carry it all alone. This surrender is not giving up, it is handing over. It's saying to God, I can't do this without you. That is strength, that is faith in action. Letting go is not weakness. It takes great courage to admit you're not in control. It takes inner power to say, I don't have all the answers, but I trust the one who does. The world tells you to rely on your own ability to fix everything yourself, but God says, my power is made perfect in weakness. That means the very place you feel inadequate, the space where you feel afraid or incapable, is exactly where God's strength can shine the brightest. When you surrender control, you're not stepping into emptiness, you're stepping into divine guidance. Many people live in constant tension because they refuse to loosen their grip. They pray for peace, but they also want to dictate the timeline, the method, and the outcome. And that internal tug-of-war becomes exhausting. It wears the soul thin. That's why surrendering is so powerful. It breaks the cycle. It stops the inner fight. It allows God to work freely without interference from our fear-based decisions. We often confuse control with responsibility. Being responsible means doing what you can, with faith and integrity. But control comes from fear. It's the belief that if you don't manage every detail, everything will fall apart. Control is fueled by anxiety. Responsibility is rooted in trust. When you surrender to God, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are aligning it. You are putting your effort in its rightful place, under God's authority and guidance. There's also a deep peace that follows surrender. When you truly let go, when you release the need to steer every outcome, your heart can breathe again. Your mind can rest. Your soul can be still. It's in that stillness where you begin to feel God's presence more clearly. It's in that letting go where you begin to hear His voice above the noise. You no longer carry the weight of the world. You begin to carry only what He's asked you to, and that load is much lighter. This kind of strength transforms you. It allows you to walk through storms with peace because you know who's in the boat with you. It allows you to face uncertainty without panic because your confidence is not in the planets in the planner. When you stop pretending you have it all together, God begins to show you a better way. He shows you that surrender is not the end of your strength. It's the beginning of His. So the next time you're struggling, remember this. You don't need to hold it all. You don't need to fix it all. Letting go doesn't mean you're losing. It means you're allowing God to lead. And there is no greater strength than that. Letting go is one of the hardest things to do, especially when it feels like your whole life depends on holding on. Holding on to your plans, holding on to control, holding on to how you think things should work out. But the truth is, the very act of holding on too tightly can keep you from receiving the very things God wants to give you. When your hands are clenched in fear, stress, or stubborn self-reliance, there's no space left to catch the blessings He's trying to pour into your life. Grace cannot enter a heart that's too busy trying to manage everything on its own. When you let go, something holy begins to happen. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you release the illusion that you are in charge of everything. And in that release, you begin to notice something different. Space. Space for peace to breathe again. Space for healing to begin. Space for joy to take root in places that were once dominated by anxiety and fear. Letting go makes room for grace, not just in a poetic sense, but in a very real and practical way. So many people live in a constant state of tension. Their minds are always racing. Their hearts are weighed down by what ifs and what now. They try to pray, but still find themselves worrying about what comes next. And when life doesn't go according to their carefully constructed plans, they panic. That panic isn't coming from reality. It's coming from the tight grip of control. That control creates a barrier between the soul and the spirit. But when that grip is released, when surrender truly happens, grace rushes in to fill the space. God's grace is not just a comforting idea. It's active, it's living, it works on your behalf. It steps into the places you cannot reach and begins to transform what you cannot fix. But it doesn't compete with your control. It waits patiently. It stands at the door and knocks. And when you finally say, God, I can't do this anymore without you, grace moves. It restores what was broken. It strengthens what was weak. It fills the cracks left behind by disappointment, fear, and exhaustion. Grace is gentle but powerful. It's not loud or forceful. It doesn't demand your attention. It invites your trust. And often, it doesn't look the way we expect. Sometimes grace comes as silence when we wanted answers. Sometimes it comes through waiting when we were desperate for speed. Sometimes it comes through brokenness before healing. But always it comes with purpose. Always it comes to teach us that God is not limited by our expectations. He works beyond them. Letting go also changes the way we relate to others. When we stop trying to control outcomes, we learn to love more freely. We stop projecting our anxiety onto people. We stop needing everyone around us to behave a certain way for us to feel okay. Grace teaches us to live with open hands, not only toward God, but toward others. We become more compassionate, more patient, more present. We stop striving to be enough, and we start resting in the truth that we already are loved, deeply, endlessly, unconditionally. The beauty of grace is that it doesn't require perfection. It only asks for space. Space to move, space to work, space to do what only God can do. But grace won't force its way in. You have to let go of what you're holding onto. Let go of the fear. Let go of the pressure. Let go of the shame. And when you do, you'll discover that grace was waiting all along, not just to comfort you, but to carry you. Letting go is not losing control. It is choosing divine help over human struggle. It's choosing peace over panic. And the moment you choose to release the weight, you begin to receive what God has been offering you all along. Grace in its purest and most powerful form. Faith is a word we often hear, speak, and even claim to live by. But many of us stop at belief without stepping fully into trust. It's one thing to believe in God, to acknowledge His presence, His power, and His promises, but it's another thing entirely to trust Him with every part of your life. Trust is where faith becomes active. It's where belief moves from theory into practice, and without trust, faith remains incomplete. You can go to church, say your prayers, read the scriptures, and still live as though everything depends on you. That's not real faith. That's fear wrapped in religious routine. Trusting God means you hand over not just your good days, but your unknowns, your anxieties, your fragile plans, and even your broken past. It means you stop trying to control every outcome and instead believe that God is already in the details you can't see. And that's hard because human nature wants proof. We want guarantees. We want to know what's next. But trust doesn't demand certainty. It rests in it. It doesn't require a visible path it walks, even when the road is hidden. There are many who say they have faith, but live with clenched hearts. They profess to believe God is in control, but constantly worry about their finances, relationships, health, or future. They pray, but their prayers are laced with fear. They ask God for help, but then rush ahead with their own solutions. That is not trust, that is partial surrender, and partial surrender still leads to exhaustion because you're still holding onto the steering wheel, just pretending to let go. Trust means releasing control even when it feels uncomfortable. It means taking your hands off the timeline, the process, the outcome, and placing it all in God's hands. It means choosing peace when panic feels easier. It means refusing to manipulate, overthink, or force situations into being, because you believe God sees what you cannot. You trust that He is working behind the scenes even when you see no evidence yet. One of the greatest signs of real trust is obedience. When God asks you to forgive someone who hurt you, trust says yes, even when your feelings say no. When He asks you to wait when you're desperate to move, trust stays still. When He leads you in a direction that doesn't make logical sense, trust follows. Faith without trust is just talk. But trust is faith with feet on the ground, walking it out daily, even when it's hard. Trusting God also reshapes how we face trials. Life won't always be easy. There will be loss, change, confusion, and unexpected twists. But trust anchors your soul through it all. It tells you that even in the chaos, God is still sovereign. Even in the silence, He is still speaking. Even in the darkness, He is still light. When your faith is rooted in trust, your peace is no longer attached to your circumstances. It's rooted in God's presence. Real trust is not passive, it's deeply active. It's a posture of surrender and expectation. It's praying not just for what you want, but for the wisdom to want what God wants. It's believing that if a door closes, it's for your protection. If a delay happens, it's part of your preparation. If a burden is placed on you, God will supply the grace to carry it. Ultimately, trust is about relationship. You trust someone more when you know their character. And the more time you spend with God, listening to Him, reading His Word, walking with Him, the more your trust will grow. You'll come to see that His ways are not just higher, but better. You'll stop needing to know the whole plan, because you'll know the one who holds it. And in that space, faith becomes more than belief. It becomes a daily act of trust. There's a quiet and often overlooked truth that many of us forget in our daily struggles. You were never meant to do life alone. This doesn't just apply to relationships with others. It speaks directly to your relationship with God. Deep down, the reason so many people feel overwhelmed, anxious, and burdened isn't just because life is hard, but because they are trying to carry it all themselves. They are living under a weight that was never meant to be theirs. And over time, that pressure steals their peace, weakens their hope, and dulls their sense of joy. We live in a culture that praises independence. From a young age, we're taught to be strong, self-sufficient, and to figure things out on our own. And while maturity and responsibility are important, we often take it too far. We convince ourselves that we have to fix everything, solve every problem, and carry every burden without asking for help. But this mindset is not only exhausting, it is completely out of alignment with how we were created. We were made for connection. We were made to walk with God, not ahead of Him, not apart from Him, but with Him. There's a reason why Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He didn't say, "Figure it out and then come to me." He didn't say, "Get stronger and try harder." He said, "Come." The invitation is simple, but it's also deeply powerful. It reminds us that God doesn't expect us to carry everything. In fact, He wants to carry it with us, if we will let Him. Too often, we treat God like a last resort. We try every possible solution first, exhausting our own ideas, our own strength, our own logic. And when nothing works, we finally turn to God in desperation. But what would happen if we started with Him instead? What if the first step in every situation, every challenge, every fear, every decision was to say, God, I need you in this, walk with me, guide me, carry this with me? That is where real strength is found, not in self-reliance, but in divine partnership. When you walk with God, life doesn't suddenly become easy. Challenges still come, hard days still arrive, but what changes is how you experience those moments. You're no longer walking through the storm alone. You're no longer fighting battles with only your own limited strength. God becomes your shield, your comfort, your wisdom, your anchor. He holds you steady when everything around you is shifting. He speaks peace into your chaos and gives you clarity when your vision is clouded. It's humbling to admit that you can't do everything alone, but that humility opens the door to deeper strength. It opens the way for God's grace to flow freely in your life. When you stop pretending to have it all together and start inviting God into every part of your journey, things begin to shift. You may not always see immediate results, but you will begin to feel a peace that doesn't make sense, a calm in the middle of the noise. That's the presence of God doing what only He can do. We weren't created to live in isolation, not emotionally, not spiritually. God's design for your life includes Him at the center, your source of wisdom, strength, comfort, and direction. He doesn't want to be your backup plan. He wants to be your foundation. When you walk with Him daily, you begin to understand that you are never alone, never forgotten, and never unsupported. You stop striving and you start resting in His presence. And that changes everything. There's a kind of rest your body craves after a long day, but there's also a deeper kind of rest your soul longs for, one that can't be found in sleep or vacations. It's the rest that comes when your heart is no longer anxious, your mind no longer racing, and your spirit no longer burdened with fear and pressure. This rest is not about doing nothing. It's about living in alignment with God. It's the kind of peace that comes not from checking everything off your to-do list, but from trusting that even when things are undone, God is still working. And that kind of rest only comes when you let Him lead. Many people live their lives like they're constantly running a race they didn't sign up for. Every day is full of striving, hustling, trying to stay ahead or simply not fall behind. They wake up with anxiety and go to sleep still carrying the weight of all the things they couldn't fix or finish. And through it all, they tell themselves they're doing what needs to be done, but in reality, they're operating from a place of fear, not faith. Control becomes their safety net, and rest becomes something they feel guilty for. But God's rest is not earned, it's received, and it begins when you choose to stop leading and start following. When you let God take the lead, you're no longer required to have every answer or fix every situation. You're no longer responsible for making sure everything turns out the way you imagined. You hand that burden over to someone who sees what you cannot, who knows what you do not, and who loves you far more than you understand. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. It's not passivity, it's spiritual maturity. Letting God lead means you stop rushing ahead trying to create your own peace and instead walk at the pace of His grace. His timing is different from yours, and His ways may not always make sense to you, but they are always rooted in love and purpose. When He leads with peace. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges, but it means you won't have to face them alone. And that's where true rest begins, not in the absence of hardship, but in the presence of trust. So many of us associate rest with inactivity, but rest in God is full of purpose. It's where you gain clarity, renewal, and strength. It's where your heart is reminded of who you really are, not defined by your performance or your productivity, but by your identity as a beloved child of God. When you live under the weight of control, you forget that identity. You begin to think everything depends on you. But when God leads, He brings you back to truth. He reminds you that His love doesn't waver based on what you accomplish. He reminds you that His grace is enough for today, and His plans are good, even when they don't match your own. Rest doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing things differently. It means acting from a place of peace instead of panic. It means trusting that you're exactly where you need to be, even if you're still waiting, still growing, still learning. It means believing that you're held, seen, and guided, even when the path feels unclear. When you let God lead, you walk lighter, not because your problems disappear, but because you're no longer carrying them alone. You sleep deeper because your spirit is no longer restless. You love others better because your heart is no longer guarded by fear. Rest becomes your rhythm, not just your relief. And that rhythm creates space for joy, for clarity, for connection with God. The rest you're searching for isn't found in control, it's found in surrender. When God leads, rest follows, and in that rest, your soul is restored.